Hi guys, good morning everyone. Online students, please confirm. Is my voice audible?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yes, perfect. Guys, in the last session, we discussed about how to create Spring Boot application and what is happening internally when we run Spring Boot application. Spring Boot application we can create in two ways. One is by using initializer website. Second one is by using IDE. So if you go for initializer website, you need to download the project and you need to extract the zip file and you need to import that project into IDE. So instead of doing that work, we can directly go for IDE. When you use IDE to create the project, internally it will communicate with the initializer website only. So for that, internet connection is mandatory in order to create Spring Boot application. When we create the Spring Boot application, by default one start class will be created and one properties file also will be created. So what is this start class in the Spring Boot? What is the start class in the Spring Boot? Start class is the entry point to run our boot application. Whenever you run the Spring Boot application, that execution will start from this start class. This start class is also called as main class in the Spring Boot. As part of this start class, we are calling a run method. Is it mandatory to call the run method or it is optional to call the run method? It is mandatory to call the run method. So why we need to call the run method? Run method internally doing so many operations, guys. Internally, run method is performing so many operations. So can you tell me what are the operations that are performing by run method? Yeah, it is going to start our IOC container and it will return the objects of the IOC container. Along with the IOC container, it is printing some banner and it is starting IOC container. It is calling runners and it is returning object of the IOC container. How the IOC container will be started in the Spring Boot? Which class it will use to start the IOC container? That it depends upon the starter that you are adding in the pom.xml. If you add just a normal boot starter, then it will use annotation config application context class to start the IOC container. If you use a starter web dependency, then it will use config servlet web server application context to start the IOC container. If you go for webflux starter, it is using this class to start the IOC container. So which class it should use to start the IOC container depends upon the starter we are adding in the application. When to go for normal starter, when to go for web starter, when to go for webflux starter. If you want to develop a standalone application by using Spring Boot, then this normal Spring Boot starter is sufficient. If you want to create a web application, then web starter is required. Web starter will give Tomcat server as a embedded container. You no need to set up the server to run your web application. Boot will take care of the server also to run our application. And the next one, we are having webflux starter. When we should go for webflux starter? If you want to develop a reactive application, then we need to go for webflux starter. Perfect. And we are having properties file. What is the purpose of this properties file? So if you want to change the port number, if you want to configure database properties, any messages that you want to configure in the application, we will do that by using properties file. What is the return type of the run method? Come on, what is the return type of the run method? The return type of the run method is configurable application context. What is this configurable application context? It is holding IOC container object. So by using that object, you can get the beans available in the IOC container. So when we execute application, it will start from this start class. Main method will execute. Main method will call Spring application.run method. It will perform lot of actions. It will identify when the application is started. It will load the bootstrap classes. It will start the listeners. It will print the banner. It will create the IOC, it will prepare the IOC, it will call the runners, finally it will return IOC object. We can store that object into a variable with a type as configurable application context. By using this context, can we see how many beans loaded by our application? Yes, context.get bean bean definition count. What is the meaning of bean definition count? Number of spring beans loaded by IOC container. Did I create any spring bean class in the project? No. As of now, we have not created any spring bean class. Then what are these classes which are loaded by IOC container? These are the predefined classes provided by Spring Boot to perform auto configuration. So can you tell me what is auto configuration? Can you tell me what is auto configuration? It will identify the configuration required for the application and it will provide that configuration. That is called as auto configuration. So if you see here 166 classes are loaded. So how many classes should be loaded? That also depends on the pom.xml. If you add security starter, security related classes will be loaded. If you add web starter related classes will be loaded. If you add actuator related classes will be loaded. So that is called auto configuration. Auto configuration is the process of providing configuration required for the application based on the form starters. So you no need to configure any XML here. Everything will be taken care by Spring Boot. One of the main advantage with the Spring Boot is auto configuration only. Perfect. Now, today we need to understand what is the purpose of this annotation. So in the interview also, they will ask this question, what is this annotation in the boot to start class? What is Spring Boot application annotation available in the Spring Boot start class? So this annotation is also mandatory to run our Spring Boot application. Annotation is also mandatory to run our Spring Boot application. This one annotation is equal to 3 annotations, guys. This one annotation is equal to 3 annotations. What are those 3 annotations? One is boot configuration annotation. Second one, enable auto configuration. Third one, component scanning. This, instead of writing 3 annotations, they provided one single annotation for the start class. That annotation is equal to boot configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scanning. What is the meaning of boot configuration? Earlier, we used to configure Spring Bean classes in the XML file. Earlier, we used to configure Spring Bean classes in the XML file because in our application, multiple classes will be available. Which classes IOC container should manage? Those bean classes we are configuring in the XML. Now, in the Spring Boot, XML configuration is not there. So, configuration annotation will represent a Java class which will act as a configuration class. Instead of writing the configuration in the XML, we will write the configuration in the Java class. Any Java class which contains a configuration required for the project, that class will use configuration annotation. When the Java class contains a configuration, this is a configuration class. That is the replacement for XML file. In the Spring framework, we will use the XML for the configuration, but in the Spring Boot, Java class will be used for the configuration. How to represent Java class as a configuration class in the boot application? By using Spring Boot configuration annotation. Are you guys clear? Next one. There is another annotation called enable auto configuration. What is auto configuration? Come on, guys. What is auto configuration? The process of identifying configuration required for the project based on the form.xml. So whenever we add this auto configuration annotation in the Spring Boot Maven dependencies, if you see, there will be one jar file called Spring Boot auto configurer jar will be available. Whenever you create a boot application, by default we are getting a jar file called auto configure jar file. Inside this auto configure jar file, so many packages are available. AOP related packages available, batch related packages available, DAO, JDBC, MongoDB, web, Elasticsearch, GraphQL, H2 database, HTTP, Jersey, JMS, Kafka, mail dependencies. So many jar files are available. So in these classes, auto configuration is available. So if you see this jar file, Spring Boot auto configurer.jar. Inside this jar file, there is a file called meta-inf file is available. If you go inside the meta-inf, there is a file called spring.factories. There is a file called spring.factories. When you open spring.factories, what are the classes the Spring Boot is loading to perform auto configuration? Those class names are already configured. In order to start the IOC container, some listeners are required, some initializers are required. For post-processing, some classes are required, some listeners are required, some filters are required. If any failure, to analyze the failure reason, some failure analyzer classes are available. Availability providers, data source initializer, database initializer detector. Like that, there are so many classes already configured. So as we have this auto configuration annotation is available, Spring Boot is loading all the classes which are configured in the factories file. What are the classes that are required in order to run our boot application? What auto configuration is required for the boot application? It will be loading based on Spring Boot auto configure jar file. Inside that Spring Factories class available. Inside the Factories class, some class names are already configured. When our application is started, it is going to load all the classes to perform auto configuration. Now, in our boot application, if I remove this annotation, auto configuration will happen or will not happen? Will not happen. So, is it mandatory to use that or it is optional? It is mandatory to use that annotation. At the rate Spring Boot application annotation. That one annotation is equal to below three annotations. Boot configuration, enable auto configuration. Boot configuration means represents Java class as config. Earlier we used XML as a configuration. Now we are using Java class as a configuration class. And second one, at the rate enable auto configuration to load auto configurer classes. To load auto configurer classes. In order to perform the auto configuration, some logic should be executed. Do I need to write that logic or Spring Boot will take care of that logic? Spring Boot will take care of that logic. How Spring Boot will take care of that logic? Based on some file. That file is available in the auto configurer jar file. And the next one, the most important part, component scan. So here we have a annotation called component scan to identify Spring Beans available in the project. So earlier we used to configure Spring Bean in the XML. IOC will know which classes it has to manage based on the XML configuration. But now, are we giving any XML configuration? No. In our project, multiple classes can be available. Which classes are Spring Bean classes? Which classes should be managed by IOC container will be identified as part of component scanning. So, which classes to be identified to perform dependency injection? Which classes should be loaded by IOC container? Which classes are normal Java classes in the project? Which classes are Spring Bean classes in the project? That identifying will happen by using component scanning. Are you guys clear? So tell me, what is run method and what is boot application annotation? What is the purpose of run method? Run method is used to start the boot application. It will create the IOC container and it will return the IOC container. Then what is boot application annotation? What is boot application annotation? That one annotation is equal to three annotations. What are those three annotations? At the rate Spring Boot configuration, at the rate enable auto configuration, at the rate component scanning. What is the meaning of boot configuration? What is the meaning of boot configuration? So to represent our Java class as a configuration class, It is used to represent our Java class as a configuration class. It is a replacement for the XML. What is enable auto configuration? Based on the starter, what configuration is required? Connection pool should be created or not? Server should be started or not? Security should be provided or not? IOC container should be started or not? Everything will be identified by auto configuration. What is the third annotation? Component scan. What is a component scan? What is a component scan? Component scan is used to scan, generally scanning. It will scan the project to identify which classes are Spring Bean classes, which classes are normal Java classes. If the class is a normal Java class, leave it. If the class is a Spring Bean class, load that class and perform dependency injection. If the class is a Spring Bean, IOC container will load that class. IOC container will manage that class. So here, which in our project, multiple packages will be available, multiple classes will be available. Which class is the Spring Bean, which class is not Spring Bean will identified by component scanning. Are you clear? Now let us see how component scanning will work in the Spring Boot. How the component scanning is working in the Spring Boot. So here, observe, I'm going to create one Java class with a name called user DAO. I'm creating one Java class with a name called user DAO. Let me write a constructor to understand object is created or not. System.out.println, this is user DAO constructor. System.out.println user DAO constructor. This is a normal Java class. IOC container will create the object. IOC container will not create the object. Come on. IOC will create the object. IOC will not create the object. Will not create the object. Why IOC will not create the object? This class is not a Spring Bean. This class is not a Spring Bean. It is a normal Java class. Run this application and check that. Run as boot application. Application started, server is started, it failed. Okay, remove that. Right click, run as boot application. Now I'm starting my application. 166 classes loaded. Those are predefined classes for auto configuration. But our user DAO class loaded, user DAO not loaded. What is the proof to say that DAO object is not created? Constructor is not executed. So here IOC container not recognizing our class. IOC container not considering our class as a Spring Bean because it is a normal Java class. So earlier, how we represented Java class as a Spring Bean? By using beans.xml. But in our project, beans.xml available, beans.xml not available, not available. So now I need to represent Java class as a Spring Bean using annotation. I need to represent Java class as a Spring Bean by using annotation. To represent our Java class as a Spring Bean, we can go for one annotation called @component. What is the annotation, guys? @component. So earlier we are writing like this: bean id is equal to some user DAO and class is equal to in dot ashok id dot some user DAO. Like this we will configure. But now you no need to configure like this. Whatever the class you have to represent that class as a Spring Bean, this annotation is sufficient. What is that annotation? @component. What is the purpose of @component? To represent Java class as a Spring Bean class. To represent Java class as a Spring Bean class. Now, I'm writing @component annotation. Let us run our application. Run as boot up. 1 minute. Every time server is starting, let me remove the web starter. As I have web starter in the project, the server is coming. Now, I don't want a server. I don't want reactive also. Remove everything. I have only boot starter. Security also not required. I just added only boot starter. Go to application, run as boot application. Now check how many classes are loaded. 48 classes are loaded. For our class, constructor executed or not executed? Executed. What is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of that? Object is created. Why the object is created? Why the object is created? Because our class recognized as a Spring Bean. So how I represented my Java class as a Spring Bean? By using component. Now tell me, what is the component scanning? What is the component scanning? The process of identifying Spring Bean classes available in the project. In our project, so many classes can be available. Which class is a Spring Bean? Which class is not Spring Bean? It will be identified by the Spring Boot with the help of component scanning. Are you clear? Now, let me create one more Java class and see that component scanning happening or not. New class. I'm creating a class called report to DAO. I'm creating another Java class called report to DAO. Let us write constructor for that. Write SOP system.out.println. We are specifying report to DAO constructor. Report to DAO constructor. Now run this, run as Java application or boot application. Boot application. Only one class constructor is executed. What about second DAO? What about the second DAO? For report DAO, constructor executed or constructor not executed? Not executed. The reason, it is not a Spring Bean. How to represent this as a Spring Bean? How to represent this as a Spring Bean? By using @component. I'm specifying @component. Right click, run as boot application. Now you see total 49 classes are loaded. One is report DAO, another one is user DAO. Both classes we represented as a Spring Bean. That's why as part of component scanning, boot identified these are Spring Bean classes. IOC container should create the object. Did I specify any scope for the bean? Did I specify any scope for the bean? If I don't specify any scope, what is the default scope of the Spring Bean? Singleton. That's why eager loading is happening. That's why eager loading is happening. What is the meaning of eager loading here? At the time of IOC container started, object will be created. I don't want singleton. I want to change the scope. For that, there is a annotation. I will give the scope as prototype. I will give the scope as prototype. What is the meaning of prototype? When the object will be created, when the object will be created, whenever you call getBean method, then only object will be created. So here I have report to DAO, which does not have any scope. If there is no scope, what is the meaning of that? It is a singleton. For user DAO, I configure scope. Earlier, we configure scope like this. Scope is equal to prototype. We need to specify scope attribute. But in the XML, we will specify scope attribute. But we don't have any XML. We have annotation. @scope prototype. Now, tell me, how many objects will be created now? What, for two classes objects will be created, for only one class object will be created, only for one class object will be created. Now tell me, so to understand the Spring Boot, Spring knowledge is required or not? Boot is using Spring only. The only difference, in the Spring we need to configure everything, but in the Spring Boot auto configuration is available. What is the definition of the Spring Boot? What is the definition of the Spring Boot? Spring Boot is one approach to develop Spring application with less configuration. Spring Boot is one approach to develop a Spring application with less configuration. Why people are going for Spring Boot? What are the advantages with the Spring Boot? Auto configuration, form starters, embedded servers, actuators. So whatever the configuration that we need to do in the Spring, it is automated in the Spring Boot. With the Spring Boot, we can perform rapid application development. What is the meaning of rapid application development? What is the meaning of rapid application development? Quickly we can develop our application You no need to bother about the common logics. Logics will be taken care by Spring Boot. You need to focus only on the business logic. Fine. So report DAO is a Spring Bean because I am using at the rate component. There is no scope. It comes under default scope singleton. User DAO also Spring Bean. It comes under prototype. Run the application. Now run as boot application. Now you see 49 classes are there, but object is created for only report DAO because it is a singleton. For user DAO, object is not created. Are you able to follow this? Very good. Now, next one, let me create another Java class, guys. I'm creating a class called user service. User service com.tcs. I'm creating one class with a name called user service by using a package. Now observe, I'm writing at the rate component annotation. What is the meaning of at the rate component? What is the meaning of at the rate component? At the rate component means it is a Spring Bean. Let me write a constructor here. System dot out dot println user service constructor. What is the scope of user service? Singleton. Now, user DAO also singleton. Report DAO also singleton. User service also singleton. So all these three are Spring Bean classes. Now tell me how many objects will be created. How many objects will be created? How many Spring Beans are available? How many Spring Beans are available? 3. One is user DAO. Second one is report DAO. Third one is user service. Run this application. See that? Run as boot application. Only DAO objects are creating. Why service object not creating? Why service object not creating? Service is a Spring Bean or service is not a Spring Bean? Service is a Spring Bean or service is not a Spring Bean? Service is also a Spring Bean. But why object is not created? We need to understand how component scanning will work in the Spring Boot. I gave the video. Have you gone through that video? In that I already explained how that annotation will work internally. What is component scanning? So even though our class is represented as a Spring Bean, IOC container not creating the object. The reason is component scanning. How component scanning will work internally? We need to understand that. Good. So here, guys, whenever you create the boot application, start class will be created. Inside the start class, this annotation is available, Spring Boot application. This annotation is equal to 3 annotations. One is configuration, one is auto configuration, third one is component scan. One is component scan. So what is the meaning of component scan? What is the meaning of component scan? Right. It is used to identify what are the Spring Bean classes available in the project. How to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? Come on. How to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? By using at the rate component. But here, whenever our application is created, by default, start class is coming. For the start class, there is a package name available. So what is the package name for the start class? In.ashok.it. Here, component scanning will work based on this package name. Component scanning will work based on the package name. Package naming convention is very important in the Spring Boot. You cannot create the packages whatever you want. You need to follow some naming conventions when you are creating the package name. So here, my start class is available inside a package called in.ashok.it. This package boot will consider as base package. Boot will consider this package as a base package. Component scanning will happen based on the base package naming convention. What is that point, guys? component scanning will happen based on base package naming convention. In my application, there is a package in.ashok IT. In.ashok IT package available. Inside this package, our start class is available, application.java. Inside the same package, we have user.davo.java and we have report.davo.java. User.davo.java, report.davo.java is available. Similarly, I have created one more package called com.tcs. In this, I created user service.java. So these are the classes available in the application. Start class is available inside the package. This package is called as a base package. So whatever the Spring Beans available in the base package, those classes will be identified in the component scanning. Component scanning will happen based on base package. Which is a base package in the Spring Boot? The package which contains a start class. The package which contains a start class is called as a base package. Component scanning always will start from base package. Component scanning always will start from base package. So when I run my application, start class will execute. Spring Boot will check in which package start class is available. It is available in the in.ashok IT. Okay, this is the base package for us. Let us check in that package any classes are available. There are two classes available, user DAO, report DAO. Those classes are Spring Bean classes or not. Component annotation available or not. Component annotation available. What is the scope? Scope is singleton. Okay, these are Spring Bean classes. Scope is singleton. Create the object. Create the object. After base package scanning got completed, this component scanning will check, do we have any other packages which are starting with the base package name? Do we have any other packages which are starting with the base package name? What is the second package we have? com.tcs. Is this package name matching with the base package name? Not matching. Leave that. Leave it. So component scanning will not happen for com.tcs package because that package is not the sub package for the base package. Component scanning will happen for base package along with the sub packages of the base package. So that means in your application, what are the classes you want to create? You need to use package name like this: in.ashokid.service, in.ashokid.security, in.ashokid.util. Any package that you want to start in, any package that you want to create in the project, all those packages should start with the in.ashokid. Why they should start with the in.ashokid? That is a base package. So the packages which are starting with the base package are called as sub packages. The packages which are starting with the base package name are called as sub packages. Component scanning will happen for base package, then sub packages of the base package. Now if you see com.tcs, is it a sub package of the base package? No, that's why the classes available in the TCS package not loaded by the IOC container. Component scanning not identifying the classes available in the package. So tell me, what is component scanning and how it will work internally? Online students, are you able to understand what is component scanning? Online students, are you able to understand what is component scanning and how it is working? Please respond.
Yes.
Right. Guys, tell me, what is component scanning? How it is working internally?
Hello, sir.
The process of identifying Spring Bean classes available in the project is called as component scanning. So who will perform that component scanning? At the rate component scan annotation is available. How component scanning working in the Spring Boot? Based on the base package name. What is the base package name in the Spring Boot? What is the base package name in the Spring Boot? The package which contains the start class is called as a base package name. Now, so I hope you got the clarity why the object is not created for user service class. Okay, let me go and create one more class, new class. For this, I'm using the name as email utils. This class I will create inside in.ashokid.utils package. Email utils class. Let us write a constructor system.out.println email utils constructor. Represent this as a Spring Bean by using component. Now, for this class, object will be created, object will not be created, will be created because it is available as a Spring Bean, and this class is present in the sub package of the base package. Observe that. Right click, run as boot application. Here, can you see email utils object is created? Yes, email utils object is created. Perfect. Now, so here, now we understood what is base package and what is sub package. What is base package? What is sub package? The package which contains boot start class is called as a base package. The package which is starting with the base package name is called as a sub package. So in several batches, we have seen that people will say that, sir, my application is not working. For my application, dependency injection is not happening. The reason is people will not follow proper naming convention. So you need to be very careful when you are creating the classes with the packages in the Spring Boot. Base package. All the packages should start with base package name in the Spring Boot. Then only component scanning will happen for those packages. If your package name not following the base package name, that package will not participate in the component scanning. Those package classes will not loaded by Spring Boot. IOC container will not manage those classes. Are you clear? Very good. Now the question is, sir, can we configure two base packages in the Spring Boot? Currently, how many base packages available? Only one. In which package our start class is available? That is a base package. First base package scanning will happen. The Spring Beans available in the base package will be loaded. Objects will be created for those classes. Then after, sub packages will be scanned. For the sub package classes also, objects will be created. But now my requirement is, I want to configure two base packages in the project. That means I want to tell to the Spring Boot, hey Spring Boot, you take in.ashokit as one base package and you take com.tcs also as one base package. It is possible we can configure two base packages also. But it is possible to configure two base packages. That means whatever the default behavior of the Spring Boot, we can customize that. Whatever the default behavior available for the Spring Boot, we can customize that. How to customize that? So we are going to override the component scan. What we are going to do, guys? We are going to override component scan. Here, base packages is equal to array type. Now I will specify in.ashokit as one base package, com.tcs as one base package. So if I don't writing this annotation mandatory or writing this annotation is optional? Come on, writing this annotation is mandatory or writing this annotation is optional? Optional. If I don't write this annotation, what is the base package? Default. Wherever the start class is available, that is a base package. But my requirement is, I want to scan all the packages which are starting with in.ashokit, all the packages which are starting with the com.tcs. I want to configure two base packages. If you want to configure two base packages, then you can write component scan annotation with the base packages. Like this, you can configure multiple base packages also in the Spring Boot. Like this, you can configure multiple base packages also in the Spring Boot. Run this application now. Run as boot application. Now can you see service object also created? In which package the service is available? In the com.tcs. So com.tcs also base package. Now assume that. Here I'm creating one more class, new class com.tcs.util. Here I'm creating a class called password utils. I'm creating password utils. Write a constructor system.out.println password utils constructor. Now, for this class, object will be created or not? For this class, object will be created or not? Yes. Why object will be created for this class also? com.tcs.util. It is following the base package naming convention. in.ashoka it is one base package. com.tcs is another base package. Like this, can I configure multiple base packages? Yes. So here component scan base packages is a array. You can configure any number of values. You can configure any number of packages. Now run this application. Run as boot application. Now you see report DAO, user DAO, they are in the in.ashoka IT base package. Email utils is available in the service. Okay. User service available in the TCS package. Password utils also available in the TCS package. That means in our application, total 4 packages are available. All the 4 packages are participating in the component scanning. We configured 2 base packages in our application. How to configure our own base package? Component scan annotation we need to write in the start class. If you don't write this annotation, it will consider only this as a base package. Are you clear? What is component scan? How the component scan working internally? Tell me, what is component scan? Component scan is the process of identifying Spring Bean classes available in the project. How component scan will identify? By scanning the packages. So which package it will scan? Base package and sub packages of the base package. What is the default base package in the Spring Boot? The package which contains the start class is called as a base package. What is a sub package in the Spring Boot? What is a sub package in the Spring Boot? The package which is starting with the base package name is called sub package in the Spring Boot. Can we configure more than one base package in the Spring Boot? How to configure more than one base package? By using @component scan base packages is equal to multiple packages you can configure. How to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? @component. How to represent a scope for the Spring Bean? @scope annotation. Do I need any XML now? No. Spring Boot will not support for XML because XML is outdated approach. XML is outdated approach. Are you clear with this? Okay, good. How component scan will work internally? How to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? How to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? Okay. How component scanning will work internally? Guys, in the class, I'm not writing the detailed notes because it will waste our time. I have already prepared soft copy material for all the modules in the Spring Boot. I will share those materials mostly by this weekend. I'm just segregating all the modules notes I have in text file. So I'm not writing everything in the every point I cannot write in the class. It will take a lot of time. So I'm explaining the concept. So by this weekend, I will share module wise material. Spring Core, I will give the material for that. Spring Boot, I will give the material for that. A text file is available, I will give that file. I can't write each and every point in the class. It will take time. It will increase the duration of the course. Okay, good. So we understood how component scan will work internally. Component scan will work based on base package. Based on base package. Start class package is called as base package. Okay, boot will scan base package and its sub packages. Base package and its sub packages. Okay, now can we configure more than one base package? Yes, we can configure more than one base package also, like below. Like this, you can configure more than one base package also. All the packages starting with in.ashok IT, all the packages starting with the com.tcs will be scanned. Are you clear? Good. So as of now, we are using @component annotation. What is the meaning of @component annotation? What is the meaning of @component annotation? To represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. If we represent our Java class as a Spring Bean, IOC container will create the object. So who is creating the object? IOC container. Sometimes in the project, for some classes, I don't want IOC to create the object. For some classes, for DAO, for controller, for service, IOC will create the object. That is okay. Okay. If you represent @component annotation, IOC container will create the object. But in my project, there is a special requirement. In my project, there is a special requirement related to security. There is a special requirement related to security. So for security, I want to customize the security for my application. I want to customize the security for my application. Then security class will be available. For the security class, IOC should not create the object. Programmer should create the object. IOC should not create the object. Programmer should create the object. Whatever the object we are creating, that object should be eligible for the auto wiring. Are you guys getting my point? So as of guys, little tricky concept, but very, very, very important. Concentrate. Here, I have taken online student. Please concentrate, guys. Here I have taken user DAO class. For user DAO class, I have given @component. What is the meaning of @component? What is the meaning of @component? IOC container will create the object. That is okay. But here in my application, there is a requirement. New class app security. I want to implement my own security logic in the application. in.ashokit.security. I have created my own security logic in the application. Inside this, I'm writing one constructor. Okay. Let us write system.out.println app security constructor. App security constructor is available. If I represent this as a Spring Bean, what will happen? If I represent as a component, what will happen? IOC will create the object. I don't want IOC container to create the object. I want to create the object on my own. I want to create the object on my own because for this object creation, I'm taking some algorithm as a input. IOC don't know which algorithm I want to use to perform the operation. Okay. So if I don't want to choose any algorithm, if I want to go with the default algorithm, I will represent as a Spring Bean. IOC will create the object. But here, my project requirement is different. I want to customize security according to my requirement. I want to pass my own algorithm to secure my application. Got it? So in that scenario, IOC container should not create the object. I will create the object programmatically, but IOC should recognize this as a Spring Bean object. Are you getting my point? It is a normal Java class. I will create the object programmatically, but what IOC should consider? It should consider as a Spring Bean. So here, whatever the work that IOC should perform, now I will do that work. I will create that object. IOC should take this object as a Spring Bean object. So for this, let me go for our start class. Let me go for our start class. Inside this start class, I will write one method. Inside the start class, I will write one method, public app security. That is our bean. What is the Java class I created? Public app security, create security object. Create security object. Here I will write the logic, app security AS is equal to new app security. New app security. Okay, I'm passing algorithm as SHA-256. This is one security algorithm. Okay, then I will return this object. You got it? What is the logic I have written now? I created one method. That method is creating the object for the security with the algorithm name. Now let me run my application and see security class object is creating or not. Run as boot application. Is it creating app security object? Come on. Is it creating the app security object? No. Why it is not creating the app security object? Is it a Spring Bean? Is it a Spring Bean? No. App security is not a Spring Bean. It is a normal Java class. It is a normal Java class. I created one method. What is the purpose of this method? Create the object and return the object. Create the object and return the object. But who should call that method? I created the method. I have written the logic to create the object for the app security class. Now, I should tell to IOC container, hey IOC, you call my method to take security object and represent that as a Spring Bean object. So we need to inform IOC container to call this method. To inform IOC container to call this method, we will write one annotation called @bean annotation. What is that, guys? @bean annotation. So in the interview, they will ask, what is component? What is bean? What is component? What is component? If you want IOC container to manage your object, if you want IOC container to create the object for your class, then you go for component. Suppose if you don't want IOC to create the object, if you want to create the object on your own, and if you want to represent that as a Spring Bean, write a method to create and return the object. For that method, you keep a annotation called @bean. Then IOC container will call this method. IOC container will take our object. IOC container will represent our object as a Spring Bean object. Now run this. Run as boot application. Now can you see here? Now can you see here? App security object is created. Actually, who is creating the object? Who is creating the object? Programmer is creating the object by writing a method. Who is calling that method? IOC container. Why IOC calling that method? Because of @bean. Okay. In the project, multiple classes will be available. Some classes objects IOC will create. If any customization required, then such a kind of objects we are going to create, like security customization, data source customization, actuator customization. Any customization you want in the project, then you need to create the object programmatically and you need to tell to IOC to call that method. For that we are writing @bean annotation. I will show you where we will use that in the real time. Go to our GitHub repository. So many repositories are available here, guys. Now, yes. What is this? Security JDBC authentication. I want to secure my application. Go to here, main Java. What is this? Security configuration. When I go for security configuration, what is this? @bean. I have created one method. In that method, I have implemented the logic to secure our application. This method will return security filter chain object. So who will call this method now? Programmer is writing the logic to create the security object. But why we are not asking IOC to create the security object? IOC don't know what security should be used for our application. In our application, 10 methods are available. Which methods should be secured, which methods should not be secured, IOC don't know. As a programmer, I know that. In my application, some methods requires security, some methods does not require security. So that information I need to give to the IOC by using a filter. That filter object I am creating. I am telling to IOC to call the method. For that, I am using a annotation called @bean annotation. Okay, good. Come back. Let me go to one more application. So there will be a application called Swagger. Spring Boot Swagger application is available. Go inside this. Swagger config. What is this? I have written one method. What this method is returning? Docket. So there is a class called docket class available to generate the documentation for the REST API. So Spring Boot don't know what documentation it has to generate, for which classes documentation is required, because Spring Boot can just IOC just create the object, but here customization is required. When you want to customize your object creation, then we will go for bean method. I'm writing a method to create and return the object. That method should be called by IOC container when the application started. In such a scenario, I will write the method with the object creation and I will keep @bean. Then IOC container will call that method. Are you able to understand? When to go for @bean annotation? When to go for @bean annotation? If you want to customize object creation, then you will go for @bean annotation method. Okay. If you want direct IOC to create the object, if you want direct IOC container to create the object, @component. If you want to create the object, @bean annotation. Are you guys clear with this? Yeah. So tell me, what is boot application annotation? That is a mandatory annotation for the start class. That one annotation is equal to 3 annotations in the Spring Boot. What are those 3 annotations? What are those 3 annotations? @boot configuration, @auto configuration, @component scan. What is a component scan? It is the process of identifying Spring Bean classes available in the project. How component scanning will happen in the Spring Boot? Based on the base package name. What is the base package name? Where the start class is available, that is the base package name. First it will scan the base package, then it will scan the sub package. What is a sub package? The package which is starting with the base package name is called sub package. Can we configure more than one base package? Yes. How to do that? @component scan annotation. Okay. But in the projects, mainly one base package will be available. Proper package naming convention we need to follow. Good. Next one. What is @component? What is @component? It is used to represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. What is @scope? What is @scope? It is used to represent scope of the bean. If I don't specify the scope, By default, it will become singleton. Okay. Then what is @bean? What is @bean? To customize any object creation in the Spring Boot, we will go for @bean. Remember, component is a class level annotation. So component annotation, we are writing at the class, but bean annotation, we are writing at the method. Remember that point. Component is a class level annotation. Bean is a method level annotation. Sir, can I use @bean at the class level? Is it possible? No. That annotation cannot be used at the class. That annotation should be used only at the method level. So whenever you write a method with @bean, IOC container will call that method. Whatever the object returning by the method, IOC will consider that object as a Spring Bean object. Are you clear with this? Good. Any questions as of now? Guys, see here, whatever that we are doing is very less. Whatever the Spring Boot is doing is very high. We need to understand how it is working internally. That's it. Common logics already implemented. You need to focus only on the business logic part. Next one. Guys, in the real time, when we want to customize the bean objects, when we want to customize the bean objects, we are going to write bean methods. We are going to write the bean methods. For example, I want to customize 10 bean objects. I want to customize 10 bean objects. Then I need to write 10 methods in the start class. So here, why this bean method is executing? Because this Java class is already represented as a configuration class. But in the real time, as a best practice, instead of writing bean methods in the start class, we will create a separate class for the customization that is called app config class. So we can write the bean methods in the start class also. Start class is also a configuration class. Instead of writing the bean methods in the start class, in the real time, we will create a separate configuration class. Why? Because in the real time project, customization required for multiple times. One is security customization is required. Security we need to customize. Okay. Data source we need to customize in the real time. Data source we need to customize. Kafka customization is required. Kafka customization is required. Redis customization is required. Redis customization is required. And the next one, documentation customization, Swagger customization is required. Swagger customization is required. For security, we need to do some customization. For a data source, database communication, some customization. Kafka customization, Redis customization, Swagger customization. Lot of beans we need to customize in the real-time project. So instead of writing all those beans in the start class, what we do is we will create one separate Java class, guys. We are going to create one separate Java class. That Java class is called as a config class. What is that class? Config class in .ashokid.config. I'm taking a class called config class. Inside the config class, we will write our bean method. Inside the config class, I'm writing the bean method. To represent this class is a config class, we are going for @configuration. What is the annotation? @configuration. What is the meaning of @configuration now? What is the meaning of @configuration now? Any customized beans you want to create in the project, you can write in the config class. So it is a replacement for the XML. Instead of configuring the beans in the XML, you can configure the beans in the configuration class. To represent our Java class as a configuration class, we are going to use @configuration annotation. We will use @configuration annotation. Perfect. Run this application now. Let me write a constructor to understand config class object is creating or not. System.out.println system.out.println app config constructor. Now run this. Run as boot application. Okay. Can you see what happened? App config constructor is executed. Bean method is executed. Our app security object also created by using this bean method. So you can write the bean methods in the start class also. You can write the bean methods in the start class also, because start class is also a configuration class. If you don't want to write in the start class, then you can create a separate class called configuration class. Now if you see, my Swagger is available. Am I writing Swagger configuration in the start class? I'm writing a separate class for that. Separate class. How I am representing that as a configuration class? @configuration annotation. Similarly, if you go for my security project also, Spring Security JDBC, okay, SRC main Java security configuration. So security bean, am I writing in the start class? I'm writing a separate security configuration. Separate security configuration. How to represent that as a configuration class? By using @configuration. So I hope you got the clarity on 3 annotations today. One is @component. Second one is @bean. Third one is @scope. @scope. Fourth one @configuration. So what is the purpose of component? What is the purpose of component? To represent our Java class as a Spring Bean, IOC container will create the object. What is the purpose of @bean? Purpose of @bean, IOC container will call the method so that programmer will create the object. Whatever the logic we write to create the object in the method, method will be called by IOC container. What is @scope? By default, Spring Bean scope is singleton. If you want to customize that, you can go for @scope. What is @configuration? To represent our Java class as a Spring Bean, we are going for @configuration. Are you clear? So with this, we got full clarity on what is the start class. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? What is the start class in the Spring Boot? Start class is the entry point for boot application execution. Start class is entry point for boot application execution. What is the Spring application.run method? It will start the IOC container. What is this boot application annotation? Configuration class, auto configuration, and component scanning. Component scanning is the process of identifying Spring Beans available in the project. Base package naming convention is very, very important. The start class package is called as a base package. The Java class, the package which contains the start class is called base package. Always scanning will start from base package. Then it will scan sub packages of the base package. If you want, you can configure multiple base packages also by using component scan annotation. Are you clear with this? Good. Fine. Any questions, anyone? Offline students? Anybody having any questions? Able to follow? Are you able to develop the application also? Yes. Tomorrow we will understand how to perform auto wiring by using annotation. How to perform auto wiring by using annotations in the tomorrow session. Okay. Thank you guys.
Yeah, hi sir. Good morning. Yeah, I have one doubt.
Yeah. Online students, any question,
Hello?
anyone? You can type in the chat box.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Guys, 1 minute. Configuration annotation will possible replace the component annotation. No, Veera. Configuration annotation and component annotation both are different. Is it mandatory to define Balchandar? Is it mandatory to define the bean method in the configuration class only? No. Bean method you can define in any Spring Bean class. Bean method you can define in the start class. Bean method you can define in the component class. Bean method you can define in the configuration class also. It's not mandatory to define only in the configuration class. Okay.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Someone is asking if we mention the scope, Parmesh, if we mention the scope as a prototype, lazy loading. How to get the bean object? By using IOC container context.getBean, it will give you the Spring Bean object. It will create the object and it will give you that object. In the start class, why already Ashok IT is a base package now? Why are you calling Ashok IT again as a base package? If you write the component scan with only com.tcs, it will consider only com.tcs as a base package, not Ashok IT package. So if you want both packages, you need to specify both. If you specify com.tcs, it will consider only com.tcs as a base package. Mr. Kalyani, you need to specify that. Are we going to cover Spring Cloud? Yes, we are going to cover the Spring Cloud. Bean method will be called by IOC container. Yes. Component scan will scan the classes and create the objects. Then why component? So component scan will create the object if the class is having component annotation. If the class does not have component annotation, the component scanning will not create the object. Mr. Ganesh, component scanning will happen, but that class should be a Spring Bean. To represent that class as a Spring Bean, we are writing component. If you don't write the component, then component scanning will not perform the object creation for that. When the Java project batch will start? Tomorrow I will confirm the date for the Java project batch. What is the exact difference between configuration and component? Configuration class is used to configure the bean methods, guys. That's it. Component means a Java class which contains a business logic. Component means a Java class which contains the business logic. Configuration means the class which is used to configure the bean methods. That's it. Okay. Ganesh, just we understood component. There are other annotations also. @service, @repository, @controller, @rest controller. So those annotations we are going to discuss in the tomorrow session. Are we going to cover JWT? Yes, we are going to cover JWT also. Okay, guys, good. Funny, please talk to admin team regarding that. Can we create more than one beans.xml? Yes, you can create multiple beans.xml files. Multiple beans XML files you can give as input for single IOC container. One IOC container can read the data from two beans.xml files also. Because it is possible, two XMLs you can give as input for one IOC container. All right. Good, guys. Thank you. With this, I'm stopping for today and we'll meet in the tomorrow session. So please practice component scanning and we'll discuss auto wiring in the tomorrow session. Thank you, guys.